Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. We do have a very special guest today and an amazing discussion ahead of us. So, to kick us off, I would like to introduce you to Women in Tech Canada. We're going to take a brief 5 minutes for some introductions. I'll talk a little bit about myself. I'll introduce our special guest here, Shiri, and then we'll show you a very special video. Um, and then we'll get on with the discussion. So, welcome everyone. This webinar session today is about leading with accessibility. We will be talking about how the culture shifts when we take action with it. So, today's guest is Shiri Ohayon, and I'll let her introduce herself. She's an amazing person. But first, I would like to talk a little bit more about women in tech for those of you who are new here. Women in Tech's mission is to empower 5 million women by 2030. It is an incredibly difficult goal, but one that I'm so proud to be part of. And I'm super happy that you're here as well, being part of that dream that we have. In the Canadian chapter, we have presence across all of the provinces in Canada. I am in British Columbia, Vancouver, and I'm the head of BC. So I've been with Women in Tech Canada for over a year now, and I'm so happy to be part of this incredible team, bringing to you opportunities, bringing networking, partnerships, everything you can imagine in sessions like this. So with that being said, we are, as a global organization, we are active in over 65 countries. We have over 300,000 members across our socials. And in Canada specifically, we have over, I believe we crossed 2,000 now. So I think that number is a little bit, yeah, I'm pretty sure we crossed 2,000. So yeah, I'm super excited to be here to introduce a little bit more about what we do and what we have coming up. So later this year, we do have a North America Award. So I do want to talk a little bit about that. If you are in Montreal or if you're willing to travel, we have a beautiful symposium, a beautiful keynote afterwards, a party, and the awards. So we invite you to nominate the incredible women that are impacting your life, and we invite you to join us as well. So save the date. That is on September 9th in Montreal, Quebec. So yes, brief introduction about myself. As I mentioned, I'm with Women in Tech Canada. I'm Bibi Souza. I have been with the company, sorry, not the company, I apologize for that, with the organization for over a year. I am the head of British Columbia, and I love hosting events like this. It is my pleasure and part of my personal goals to help bring everyone in this journey of self-development, professional development, and everything in between. So with that being said, I would love to introduce you to our special guest here, Shiri. Shiri, if you'd like to hop on and introduce yourself.
Thank you. Thank you, Bibi, for that lovely introduction. So, like Bibi said, my name is Shiri Sol Ohayon, and I'm a light-skinned Middle Eastern woman with dark, somewhat unruly hair. And I am wearing my Navy 15th anniversary GAAD t-shirt today to celebrate GAAD. I lead our digital Accessibility and Accommodation Center of Excellence at Deloitte Technology Canada. And I am so grateful to Women in Tech for marking the Global Accessibility Awareness Day by platforming this really important conversation. I'd also like to thank our audience for joining us. Accessibility and disability inclusion is a very big topic. We probably won't be able to cover all of it in one session, but I invite all of you to welcome the potential for change and think about how this topic shows up in your life and identify where you can have an impact. My role today is simply to light the spark of curiosity, and hopefully you'll join me on this wonderful journey.
Awesome. Thank you, Shiri. So, just before we get on with the discussion, I wanted to give the audience some of the takeaways from today. And of course, like you mentioned, we won't be able to cover every single aspect of accessibility. So, we'll try to keep it brief, spark that curiosity. But for today, the plan is to cover and go into a bit of a deep discussion over digital accessibility, and we'll make sure to create that distinction between what accessibility is versus digital. So we'll talk about that shortly. But some of the takeaways for today for you who are listening, you will gain a clear and practical understanding of disability inclusion, what accessibility is, and why it matters. You'll also learn what digital accessibility really means. Also, you will learn and explore digital accessibility fail points, things such as color contrast, missing alternative text, which we'll talk about shortly, and also discover some of the practical tools and simple testing methods that are out there and are accessible to you that can help you, your teams, your applications, your websites go on this journey. So, with that being said, I would like to kick us off by playing a very, very special video. This is by Jennison Asuncion. He is the co-founder of the Global Accessibility Awareness Day, the t-shirt that Shiri is proudly wearing today, and
Yep.
it is coming up soon. So we're super, super happy to show you this video to just set the discussion for us today. So we can play that now.
Well, hello, everyone. My name is Jennison Asuncion, and first, thank you for joining this important event. I am co-founder of Global Accessibility Awareness Day, and this year is kind of special because it's the 15th Global Accessibility Awareness Day, or GAAD as we call it. Why do we have GAAD? It's a day to talk about, think about, learn about all aspects of digital access and inclusion by and for people with different disabilities or impairments. And the mission of the foundation is to disrupt the culture of digital product technology and digital product development to include accessibility as a core requirement. That's a bit of a mouthful and lofty, but essentially what we're really championing is the idea that accessibility needs to be brought in right at the very beginning during ideation, but straight through the development process. It can't just be a QA function because accessibility needs to be thought about from the design stage, because that's where a lot of the egregious accessibility failures typically happen. So again, you can learn all about the different programs of the foundation by going to gaad.foundation. I really appreciate you joining the fireside chat. Thanks, Shiri, for doing it. And happy 15th Global Accessibility Awareness Day from Joe, Devin, and me.
What a lovely video. What a lovely
He's
video.
wonderful.
I absolutely love it. It's so good.
Yeah, he's fantastic.
Awesome.
They do such great work. So we have really great people in this space. So we're very lucky.
I love it. I can't wait to get into this discussion. Awesome. So, without further ado, I really want to get into the opening and context setting for
Mhm.
the audience here. So, my first question, Shiri, would be let's take the audience on a journey. Let's level set so everyone's on the same page here.
Yeah.
How do you define accessibility and disability inclusion in today's world?
Well, it's a great place to start because at its core, disability inclusion and accessibility is about equity and removing the barrier to entry. Access, in reality, is the outcome of intentional inclusion. So, digital accessibility, what it does is basically it unlocks what every organization is looking for: a smoother, frictionless user experience, clear communication, more engagement. It builds trust by placing value on the beautiful diversity of the human experience. Our digital experiences, when we talk about the difference between accessibility, disability inclusion, and digital accessibility in particular, um, our digital experiences are such a big part of our day-to-day lives. It's how we communicate, how we work, how we learn, how we manage our finances, how we shop, even how we navigate physical spaces today. So it's such an essential part of everything that we do, which is exactly why when we think about digital accessibility, we can't think of it as something that is niche or a nice to have. It's foundational. And prioritizing digital accessibility is incredibly important.
I love that. So I absolutely love what you're saying. I want to explore so many different threads here with you.
Yeah.
But I remember you shared with me a very personal story. So I want to understand, and if you're comfortable, share with the audience. Why is accessibility so important to you?
So, accessibility has always played a major role in my personal life. My aunt is a Paralympic gold medalist, and you can see her on the screen. She's wearing her fencing gear, and I come from a neurodivergent family. My mom, who's in the center of the screen there, with my twins, she is dyslexic. My siblings have varying forms of ADHD, and both of my twins are neurodivergent, and they each have their own set of needs. So, as you can imagine, I grew up with a very strong sense of allyship. Now, in my professional life, my transition into the accessibility space came much later. In 2021, Deloitte Canada published an accessibility action plan. And one of the takeaways from that plan was to have dedicated roles for accessibility across different streams. So I really am one of the lucky ones because in my role, I get to wear two hats. One with a focus on our digital accessibility program, and the other is a focus on ensuring that our practitioners internally, including our practitioners with disabilities and our neurodivergent practitioners, have the tools in place that they need to help them thrive. I'm I'm so grateful to the leadership at Deloitte and to my colleagues because it's just we're all kind of coming together for this ultimate goal, right? Of having this strong impact that matters. And we have such great mentors internally at Deloitte and of course kind of like working with other people in this space. So just feel very grateful for that.
Yeah, of course. I was really touched by the story of your aunt and your mom.
Yeah.
So, of course, the challenges that they faced back then, so 40 years ago versus now, I'm sure they're very, very vastly different.
Yeah.
But from your perspective, what progress stands out to you the most? And where do you think we're still falling short?
That's a really good question. I'll take you on a on a little bit of a story. So, focusing on my mom, for example, she grew up in the 50s. Dyslexia was not recognized for what it is, and it was incredibly challenging for her. She was labeled as stupid, won't amount to anything, when in reality, she is just the wisest woman I know. And when I think about her experience and I see some of the residual impact of those labels that kind of, she carries with her today, I think about my siblings growing up in the 80s and the 90s. It really depended on who your teacher was and how well versed they were with what was considered learning disabilities. And I look at today, I look at my twins. They attend a school where there's a whole resource department that's equipped to support them on their educational journey. So I ground myself in that optimism because I know and I've seen firsthand just that we know better. When we know better, we can do better. And that's exactly why I love what I do so much. And that ties into my driver, my why. I know that every initiative that I lead and all the progress that I'm driving for means that when my twins enter the workforce, it's going to be a non-issue, right? It's just part of standard operating procedures. Having a support program in place, having an employee resource group for practitioners who are neurodivergent, practitioners with disabilities, having all those tools available And focusing on these programs is really going to help us make a lot of strides. So I'm, very optimistic. I've seen what happens when we don't have these programs, and I see what happens when we do. And I just, I think our opportunity for impact is incredible.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we've come such a long way compared to 40 years ago, but of course
Mhm.
there's always work to do, right?
Absolutely.
And I
And we
think
don't want it
one
to take another 40 years, right? So,
definitely not. So this is why having this conversation is so important, right?
mm,
One of the things that some people might not understand is the scale of
mhm.
accessibility needs. There's roughly 1.3 billion people globally
Exactly.
that need some level of accessibility tools, or the word escapes me now, but some level
Features.
of
Yeah.
adjustment. Yeah, yeah,
Supports.
exactly. So for those who are listening here, that maybe you work at an enterprise company or a small company, startup, there is just so much business opportunity there, right? When you're
Mm,
talking 1.3 billion in a market that's largely overlooked, and I remember you gave me some stats,
mhm.
95% of the websites out there are not accessible. They fail the access checker. So a
Yeah.
major business opportunity here.
Yeah.
My question to you, Shiri, is from your point of view, why do you think accessibility is not treated as a major market opportunity?
I think that there tends to be this misconception, right? That digital accessibility is solely about accommodating a specific group of people, and in reality, it's about all of us, right? Accessibility is essential for some, but it truly is beneficial for all of us. So it's not about an us and a them. It's about all of us showing up, right? And when we think about digital accessibility in particular, it becomes a competitive advantage when it's treated as a design and a strategy decision, not something that you'll fix downstream, right? When organizations adopt an accessibility first mindset, they tend to build more flexible, more intuitive, more resilient solutions. Inclusive and accessible design is simply better design, and it leads to better experiences for everyone, not just a subset of users as some people may think, right? And tech that prioritizes personalization really empowers users to engage and consume content. It's a huge differentiator because when accessibility is embedded and becomes part of how an organization operates and delivers, it ends up triggering a big cultural shift. So we remember, right, when we talked in the beginning that access is the outcome of intentional inclusion. This whole journey is not about achieving perfection. It's not about the gold star. Accessibility is a continuum. And to gain advantage, organizations really need to take consistent, intentional steps forward.
Speaking about the steps that organizations need to take, I want to start building this concept of designing for the edges, because this is
Mhm.
a theme during our discussions when we were talking about this webinar, and I
Right.
really love that phrase, designing for the edges. So what does that mean in practice? And I know this is a packed question. Things like I would love to unpack with you what are the differences between a permanent, a temporary, and a situational disability. Maybe we can also dive a little bit deeper into some examples of designing for the edges and everyone benefiting. And I think maybe we have some UX designers here listening to us, so you can all keep
Yeah.
this in mind when designing products, because, like you mentioned earlier, some of these decisions they have to be made at the
Mm,
very beginning. It has to be intentional. You can't just fix later, right? So
yeah.
I would love to just expand a little bit on that. What does that really mean in practice?
Yeah. Well, you can fix later, but it just means a lot of investment, a lot of money, a lot of work that may not have been budgeted for, right? So it's something that if you address it initially, you shift left, you think about it first, you adopt that accessibility first mindset, it really helps. It really helps you when you kind of like deliver the solutions that you're working on. So at a high level, it means taking a variety of user stories and access situations into consideration. So when you're thinking about designing a tool or a platform or a website, you need to think about, for example, the experience of a screen reader user or someone who navigates this digital platform using only their keyboard, right? Without using a mouse. To do that, we have the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, or WCAG, which is a set of internationally accepted standards that have four main pillars with the acronym POUR. So that's just a little trick to help you remember. But what it stands for is perceivable. So, is the information that you're sharing perceivable to all users? Are there captions included in your videos? Do your images include alternative text for screen reader users? The second one is operable. Can users navigate using only their keyboard? Can they pause moving content to avoid triggering a seizure? There's all these kinds of situations that need to be taken into consideration. The third one is understandable. Are you using clear language or are you overcomplicating things? Is the navigation experience predictable? And then the fourth one is robust. So can that content be interpreted by a wide variety of user agents? So screen readers or other different types of adaptive or assistive tech that's available for people with disabilities. Can they access the information using those tools? So those standards evolve, over time. The latest one is WCAG 2.2 AA. That's kind of the standard, and 3.0 is currently in the works. Most digital accessibility legislation tends to reference 2.1 AA. And in Canada, for example, the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, or the AODA, references a slightly older standard, which is 2.0. But legislative requirements tend to vary, but most of them reference WCAG as those kinds of standards. Now, when we think about designing for the edges, the focus tends to be about permanent disabilities, right? So a great example is including captions on videos to ensure that someone who is deaf or hard of hearing can still access the content. But in reality, that solution also ends up helping someone that has decreased hearing that day because maybe they have an ear infection, right? Or someone who is in a loud environment, they're in a public setting and they can't watch the video with the sound on at the same time. So one is permanent, being deaf or being hard of hearing. One is temporary, right? Having an ear infection. So it's going to be a set amount of time that your hearing is impacted. And one is situational. You're in a loud environment. You can't hear the video, but you can still follow along with the captions. The same goes if you think about those buttons to open doors, right? When you're walking into buildings, intended for people with limited mobility, like potentially wheelchair users, but someone with a broken arm can use it. And, if you're carrying a baby and you're carrying packages, we all find ourselves in these situations. And that's why the curb cut effect is so impressive. And it's really at the core of the concept that functionality that's initially intended for people with disabilities ends up benefiting a much wider group of people. So when you were mentioning earlier that number, the 1.3 billion, it's so much wider than that, right? Because it's not just impacting those 1.3 billion, it's really impacting all of us. It's giving all of us access. one example that I love to use because I absolutely adore this story is the blur feature. So Zoom, Teams, we can all kind of blur our background. Um, that feature was created at a hackathon out of the intention to better support lip readers, right? So taking away the backgrounds, the distraction, helping to improve the focus on the speaker's face and their lips as they're speaking, right? That was kind of like the initial intention. In comes COVID. We're all working remotely. No one wants to showcase their mess in their room when they're working. So all of those things, right? So that's why it's so wonderful to have these features, to think about those edge cases, designing for the edges, and think about how it ends up actually impacting so many more people than we think initially, right?
I love that. I absolutely love that example because I love my backgrounds, especially when my room's messy. So kudos
Same
to whoever came
thing.
up with that idea. Absolutely love it.
Yeah,
One of the things that I would love to expand a little bit on, and I know you had this beautiful phrase with you the other day, was that a lot of people they don't realize that you may join the group of disabilities, situational,
yeah.
temporary, or permanent, any point in time, whether
Mhm.
you're just growing old and now suddenly you need a little bit more support walking,
Right.
or you're carrying a bunch of groceries, or like you mentioned, broken arm, or you're pregnant, things like that. So, walk me a little bit through that phrase, if you don't mind, Shri, because I thought it was
Sure.
so beautiful.
Yeah, it's a great quote by Jonathan Friedman, who writes a regular newsletter on accessibility and disability inclusion. And he says, he phrased it so beautifully, I'm going to paraphrase it, but he says it's the largest minority group. The disability community is the largest minority group that spans across all genders, religion, ethnicity. It impacts everyone, really. It's the largest minority group that any of us can join at any time, you know, a slip and fall, an accident, anyone, you know, you can acquire a disease midlife. There's so many different ways to join this community. But if we're all lucky enough to age, at a certain point, we're going to join the community. We're going to have accessibility needs, right? And that really speaks also to that kind of, permanent, temporary, and situational, right? That's why it's so important for us to think about inclusion that way and being so intentional about it. But you're right, I love that quote.
Same, absolutely. Yeah, designing for the edges really is designing for ourselves at some
Mhm.
point in the future. So it's
Yeah.
taking that into consideration. I want to switch gears a little bit and talk more about some of the gaps and some of the fail points that we still see today. From your perspective, Shiri, what are some of the most common accessibility mistakes that you see people making or overlooking? I would love to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's a really great website that does this assessment every year. They run a report. It's called WebAM, and they conduct an accessibility evaluation of 1 million homepages, right? Top 1 million websites. And we chatted about this, so I'm not going to ask you to guess the number, BB, but when you think about it, 95% of homepages have digital accessibility issues. 95%. That is huge. That's a huge number. And the typical homepage tends to have anywhere from 50 to 60 accessibility errors. Most common are issues like low contrast ratio, missing alternative text, missing labels, empty links, empty buttons. Those kinds of things can cause really anywhere from a frustrating experience for a person with a disability all the way to, a complete block, right? It's a task that they cannot complete because they cannot access that functionality. So, something interesting, and it's shared in the chat for everyone. I just this morning I read an article. It was published by Evinced, which is a company that has digital accessibility testing tools. And they shared a report about they ran a scan of close to 500 websites of Fortune 500 companies. And these are all companies, mind you, that, tend to have digital accessibility programs in place and legal teams that focus on compliance and customers who would, not only notice the issues, but also report them and escalate them so that they're addressed. And the findings were a little bit better than what came up on the WebIM report, but there's still a lot of work to do. So I shared the link to the article there because I think it's a great way for us to look at kind of like when we were talking about progress before, kind of taking those intentional steps to move us forward. There's still a lot of work that needs to be done. So those kinds of key things. And some of them, like some of the areas that we were talking about, are such low-hanging fruit, right? Things that are easy to fix when you think about them, early.
100%. Yeah. A lot of these issues like color contrast and alternative text, usually as a software engineer, that takes maybe 10, 15 minutes. It is
Yeah,
such a simple fix, right? It really is just a mindset shift. I think the amount of work that goes into fixing is not the problem. It is really just that mindset and coming into the design with that in mind. Um,
that,
that being said, I would like to talk a bit about the risks. What are the risks that we might be not thinking about, both ethically and from a business perspective of ignoring accessibility needs? So I would love to talk about risks.
absolutely. So, the main risk, obviously, is exclusion of a huge market share, right? We were talking about the numbers before. But beyond that, beyond the exclusion piece, is non-compliance, right? Reputational, brand impact, legislative requirements, and compliance are really great drivers. They're a good place to start, but they can't be our why, right? There's a saying that compliance is the floor, it's not the ceiling. And from my experience, successful companies prefer to focus on reaching higher. We don't want to aim at the floor. So when you think about it, the return on investment when you focus on accessibility is huge because it is such a great driver for innovation. And organizations that adopt an accessibility first mindset tend to embed those requirements across every process and work towards stronger internal programs, right? That kind of work, when you think about it, accessibility really touches on everything within your organization. It's talent and HR. It comes across in how you work internally, how you develop, how you design, how you do QA and, kind of like manage your risks internally. It touches on procurement. When you're bringing things on into your company, are you raising those questions around accessibility? Is the tool that you're bringing on accessible? Are you bringing in a tool that not only your clients can leverage, but your internal staff can leverage, right? So all of these questions come into play when you think about accessibility and mitigating that risk. But at the core of it, when you think about it, these companies that have those intentional programs in place tend to hire more people with disabilities, which in turn enriches their workforce. It gives them that kind of like visibility into some of the potential challenges that can arise. But it also brings such great innovation because accessibility and the disability community drive innovation so well. If you think about all the workarounds that people with disabilities need to come up with on a regular basis simply by existing in a world that's not designed for them. If you think about the cognitive load, for example, for someone who is deaf or hard of hearing, when they're attending a video call and they need to focus on the facial expressions, they need to read lips, they're reading the captions, there may be, sign language interpreters, like all of those things, all the while they're still actively participating on the call. So accessibility really provides huge benefits. And the cherry on top is making that impact that matters, right?
That was such a packed question. I think I have three threads that I want to explore with you just now.
Yeah.
One of the things, the first one that popped in my brain as you were talking about the risks,
Mhm.
another thing that might be interesting for the audience to also think about is if you're selling a product on a website and the user cannot find a button by clicking on their keyboard, they can't add the product to the cart. They're going to go
Exactly.
to the next website. So you might be missing out on a lot of revenue. So having that mindset shift and really thinking about how you structure the content on your site. Is it accessible with the tabs? Can they
Mhm.
see the button, right? So that's
Yep.
just one thing that popped in my brain because
Yeah.
huge market opportunity there for those who are
Yeah,
interested in that aspect of things.
exactly.
The
Exactly.
second thing that you touched on, Sherry, was the community.
Hmm.
And I love talking about community. I myself am a community manager as well. And
Yes,
I love
same.
collaboration. I love talking about all the aspects of different like cultures, different cross collaboration
Yeah,
between different industries. And it sounds like the disability community is very creative. Like you were saying, you have to adapt, you have to be
absolutely.
creative, you have to make your work to survive, right?
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I would love to ask you is let's expand on that community aspect because I know that accessibility thrives through collaboration. And I know you have some amazing stories to share. So tell me, why is it so important to collaborate in this space?
I think that, when we're trying to enable a more equitable and inclusive digital space, we often end up facing similar challenges. And that's why there's so much power in this beautiful collaborative nature of this space. It's truly one of my favorite things about it. Organizations tend to have small teams to focus on accessibility. In a lot of cases, some companies only have employees who do this kind of work side of desk. So having the power of community is incredibly helpful. There is so much to learn and discover in this space, and by coming together and sharing our wins or how do we address different challenges, we all end up growing. I love being in this space so much because I feel that I'm learning every time. Every time I do something, every time I have a conversation, every time I work with a practitioner with a disability and something arises or another need arises, I'm constantly learning and we're constantly growing. So I myself, um, I chair a global accessibility community of practice for Deloitte. We have over 30 regular members in 14 different countries, and we meet for regular roundtables. We host guest speakers. When we bring in guest speakers, we include we have an additional distribution list of, I don't know, over 500 people that get the invite and can join the conversation. It's such a great driver. I also host another call with regular monthly call with people in my type of position, people who work in the space, people who kind of, want to learn more, want to share how they're addressing different issues, and different challenges that are coming up. And it's just such a great way for us to move forward. I heard this great, and this was back when I first started in this space. Chris Patno, who leads accessibility at Google, was talking on a webinar, and he said, big tech companies, we're going to fight on customer acquisition in other things. But when it comes to accessibility, we all end up working together because we're driving for that larger goal, right? So I love that about this space.
Yeah, I love that. That's probably one of the only spaces that I know of that is so collaborative, right? Because when you
Yeah.
think about it, there's always some kind of competition, things like that. But I
Mhm.
do think when it comes to the accessibility community,
Yeah,
everyone comes together because we all benefit. It's in our best interest to prepare
exactly.
for ourselves when we're older, our families, everyone around us, right? So it's really,
Yeah.
really endearing to see this. I love that. I also wanted to talk a little bit, I wanted to expand on what you said
Mhm.
about culture of hiring, diversity,
Yeah.
diverse employees, bringing different perspectives, and can also change the culture of
Mhm.
a company, but also the culture of a product and making it more creative, right?
Yeah.
I remember you had a really interesting example at Deloitte as well of a diverse hire. And I wanted to talk a bit about that because the disclosure of disabilities and disclosing that you have a disability
Yes.
prior to being hired versus after, how can companies accommodate? I would love to
Yeah.
talk a little bit more about that if you're comfortable.
Absolutely. There's often, hesitation around disclosure when it comes to disclosing your disability at work. There's a lot of stigma, bias, that's potential out there, and people with disabilities unfortunately end up facing that quite a bit. Um, one of the stories that I shared with you previously was that before I was in the role that I am, our accommodation program for AT, for adaptive technology or assistive tech, was really kind of done side of desk. And when the accessibility action plan came out and the dedicated role was the big takeaway, one of the big focus points for us was figuring out how do we make sure that we have a good process in place for practitioners with disabilities who request adaptive technology, right? We work in an environment, in the corporate environment, it's very similar across many different firms. Not everything is approved for use. So how do we make sure that we have the tools available and not just one solution, right? We need to offer a variety because there's a variety of experiences. Even if you think just about screen readers, for example. So there's JAWS, Fusion, Zoom Text, NVDA, there is VoiceOver on Macs. We need to be able to offer a variety of solutions because different needs require different sets of tools. But in organizations like mine, we have to go through a very long process to get things approved. So one of the things that we did when we kind of first started to focus on this, we had and this was before I was in this role, we had a new hire who has low vision and requested a screen reader. At the time, it was Zoom Text. And it took us an embarrassingly long time to get it approved. And it took way too long. So one of the things that we started focusing on was how do we work with our HR, with our talent team to make sure that our technology team is in the know when there is disclosure and you know, when these needs arise, so that we can make sure that we have the tools available for when the new hire starts. So, one of the things that we did is we wanted to equip our recruiters and our practitioners internally with a really simple tool called our AT catalog, right? We put together a catalog listing everything that's approved for use at Deloitte. And everything that was requested was not approved for use, but then what is the alternate solution that we do offer? We wanted to make sure that when recruiters go into these conversations, in case there is disclosure, they can have the resource available for them to have a real conversation with the tools available, right? And they can reference the list and see what's available. Sometimes we have practitioners who join the firm or are existing employees and a need comes up and they don't know what the right solution would be for them. So we are always open. We have conversations. We're always looking into new solutions and new adaptive tech or assistive tech that's available. But that's been really, really beneficial for us. And we were able to put in place what we call our day one readiness goal so that if there is disclosure during the recruitment process, the recruiter can submit a ticket on behalf of the user before the user even starts. And we can then look into the required tech and purchase it and make sure that it's installed and ready to go when the user comes in for their first day. So those are some of the ways that you can kind of accommodate your practitioners. Another really great way is to leverage the built-in functionality. So whether you're using a Microsoft device or a Mac device, there are fantastic, fantastic accessibility features that are available. So making sure that you enable those for your employees is critical because it really puts the accessibility features and the option to enable them at their fingertips. Takes away the need to disclose, takes away the need to put in a request, go through an overall process. It's just something that they can enable and turn on. So that's been a really big shift for us internally.
Love that. All right, so we have about 12 minutes left. So I'm going to
Mhm.
start shifting gears. I want to
Yep.
talk about the future and then I want to talk about tools, takeaways. But before we get into that, I want to invite the audience to, if you have any questions, please start putting those in the Q&A and we'll ask those at the end. But I just want to get your brains thinking. What's on your mind? What's top of mind? Is there anything that you want to ask Shiri? Is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to know? So start thinking about those. And I'm going to start shifting into more of a futuristic discussion here. So,
Yeah.
Shiri, I know we had a brief exchange over what's coming next.
Mhm.
I want to talk about what you see as the next opportunity for change.
Yeah.
What are the things that get you excited? And I know there's been chatter about AI, so we can cover AI and accessibility, but
Yeah.
what else gets you excited and what's the biggest opportunity you see for change?
I think it really ties into the point that we talked before about community and building this big movement towards more focus on digital accessibility. I see it so clearly when I look at my feed on LinkedIn and everybody having these conversations. It's so exciting to me. But of course, we can't have this conversation without the standard buzzword of our time, AI. It's already such a big disruptor in this space. There is so much potential there. I think it's important that we think about AI and how do we make sure that we are not leaving others behind, right? How do we make sure that we include people with disabilities in the conversation? We gain their perspective on the use of these tools and these agents. How do we make sure that they are part of the process that we're kind of like rushing forward with AI because everything changes so quickly? It really is such a big disruptor in this place. And one thing that I love to see is just how digital accessibility testing, for example, is it enables us, there's so many great tools out there that enable us to do so much more at scale. And we're already seeing tools in the marketplace that detect, fix, monitor, even provide educational notes for your designers, your dev teams, your QA resources, depending on how it is, and helps them improve their skills in a targeted way by focusing on the identified errors. So there's so much opportunity there. I think the only thing that I would stress is that we make sure that we include people with disabilities in the conversations and in these kind of like, as we're driving forward with AI and everything moves really, really quickly, make sure that we're leaving no one behind.
Absolutely. So, my next question to you, it's going to be packed, packed. Um, for someone who's here today, our
Mhm.
audience is joining us. For
Yeah.
those who want to start today, what is one action that they can do to continue on this journey?
Yeah. So glad you asked. And if we can bring up the slides again, there are so many great tools out there that leverage, you know, you can leverage built-in accessibility checkers. There are different types of tools, browser extensions that you can use, color contrast checkers. Some are at a fee, obviously, require a license if you're in a professional environment. Others are free that you can leverage. There are great service providers and product providers out there for digital accessibility. And for our audience, Women in Tech will share the slides. So I curated a list of resources that'll help you get started. So the first slide is where to start. So you'll see a bunch of links to some uh, great great options when it comes to kind of focusing on digital accessibility and learning more. There's a great training video. It's really, really old. It's by DC Gov, but it's really funny and it's so well made. And that one really focuses on disability inclusion. But the others, there's like the Events Learn website where there's some foundational and role-based courses that you can access. There are so many great organizations and non-for-profits doing such amazing work when it comes to disability inclusion and digital accessibility. Um, Look at the big tech, Microsoft Accessibility, Apple Accessibility, Google. They have such great resources already in place that you can simply turn on with, the press of a button. There's really, really great resources out there. AMAC, speaking of AI, is a great way. It's actually a public AI model accessibility checker. It was co-developed by ServiceNow and Joe Devon from GAAD. And it kind of like puts a spotlight on different AI tools and how accessible they are to really keep that conversation top of mind. They also host a really great podcast if you want to listen to all these kind of like movements when it comes to AI. And if we go on to the next slide, I put together a list of some of the people that I follow on LinkedIn that share really great content. For those of you in Canada, if you're based in Toronto, there is a great conference that's happening next month called Allyverse. It's the kickoff for Allyverse, which is a new social enterprise around AI and digital accessibility. And it's also the launch of the Canadian chapter of the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. So it's a great opportunity if you're in Toronto for you to come check it out. It's happening June 8th. And I'll be there. I'm speaking on a panel, so I'm looking forward to seeing you there if you can join us. But there's so many great people doing such amazing work in this space. It's impossible to name everybody, but this is a really good place to start, and it's going to trigger your algorithm a little bit to kind of expose you to more of this information.
I love that. Sometimes all it takes is to change the algorithm a little bit.
Yeah,
So I absolutely love
exactly.
the fact that you're sending us so much resources. We will be sharing these with you, so don't fret. We will be sharing
Mhm.
these after this webinar. If you have any more questions, feel free to connect with Shiri directly on LinkedIn, with us
Absolutely.
as well if you have any questions. I'm really sad I'm going to miss your panel. I wish I could be there. But we do have a couple of questions in the Q&A chat, so I'll be reading those shortly. We
Sure.
do have about 5 minutes left, so we'll have to keep things a little bit more concise now.
Yeah.
Um, First question from Alexandra. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. They're asking for smaller boutique firms or startups, what are some great first steps that they can take, taking into consideration that budget may be tight and
Mhm.
or the team may not have the bandwidth to implement or learn all the proper steps to include people with disabilities?
It's a good question. It comes up quite often. I think, we all, big or small, we're all dealing with a lot of constraints when it comes to this corporate environment. Um, I think starting with education is probably key, making sure that people have access to that information, sharing lived experience. If you have people with disabilities on your team, walk through how they experience challenges and kind of, that's usually a good place to get started. there's some great service providers and product providers. You can take products that you can implement and add into your program. I'm happy if you want, Alexandra, to take it away. Connect with me on LinkedIn. We can have a longer conversation. I can walk you through some of the things that we put in place when we designed our program for the Center of Excellence. I'm happy to share. So really start by connecting with people in the space, learning from others, seeing what they've done, and see what works for your specific situation.
Absolutely. The next question, not really a question, but Shiri, could you please repeat the panel and the event that will be happening?
Absolutely. So it's Allyverse. That's the name of the summit that's happening. I'm gonna send it in the chat. So Oriane, if you don't mind, please share it with everybody on here. So that way, exactly. That way you have access to the link. You can register if you're in Toronto or if you can travel. It's going to be a great panel. The Chief Accessibility Officer for Canada is going to be one of the keynote speakers. Jennison, who you saw earlier, is going to be one of the speakers. I'm very lucky. It's hosted by Deloitte. We have such great leadership at Deloitte, and we're so intentional. We have a really wonderful DEI and a team that's led by Carol Mendonça and Hilary McVeigh. We have such intentionality. I love when I speak about this because our Deloitte technology team is led by Anita Chu, our CIO, and we're all being so intentional about accessibility. We've seen such an amazing culture shift internally over the past kind of 4.5 years since I've been in this role. From my perspective, just to kind of see it, I love seeing it so much because there's so much progress that can be made, but it really takes us, you need to take that first step, right? So it can seem daunting, it can seem overwhelming. There's so much that needs to be done, but taking that first step is key. So I would say for our audience, if you have one takeaway, next time you're about to send an email, click the accessibility checker. See if there's any issues on what you're about to send. If you're sharing a presentation, make sure you run the accessibility checker that's built in. Identify any issues. Are there any images that are trying to convey a message that you don't have alternative text for, and therefore some people might not be able to get that understanding of what you're trying to convey. If you're hosting an event, ask the question on your registration page. Do you have any access needs? All those types of little steps, the compound effect of every little step together is going to end up with such a significant impact. So
I
I know
love that.
that we can
I
do
love
it. We
that.
can do this.
I'm walking away from this webinar with a takeaway to make sure that the events that we host here in Vancouver, BC are more accessible. So thank you for that. It's such a
I love that.
great takeaway. I absolutely loved our discussion. I wish we had 2 more hours. There's so much that we didn't cover. This is a whole universe, right? And hopefully the resources that we'll be sharing after the webinar can continue that curiosity and keep that spark alive for everyone here. So this is everything that we have for today. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you stay connected with us, connect with Shiri. If you have any further questions, please do reach out. This is a conversation that is ongoing and it doesn't stop. It's
Thanks,
just the
everybody.
floor, not the ceiling. So we'll take that away. And thank you so much for your time, Shiri. We really,
Thank
really
you.
appreciate it. And thank you to the audience for showing up today and learning something. I really am grateful. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone. This is everything from us. Have a great rest of your day and take care.